Every man has a moment he never forgets. A moment when he looks in the mirror and realizes something he didn't want to admit before: he is not the man he promised himself he would become. Maybe he used to be sharper, hungrier, more focused, more confident, more alive. But somewhere along the way, life happened. Responsibilities, expectations, mistakes, distractions, comfort, fear, routine. And slowly, silently, he drifted. Not enough for the world to notice, but enough for him to feel it. That hollow sense that the fire inside has dimmed. That edge he used to have is gone. That the man he is not the man he could be. This is where my story begins. Not in success. Not in strength. Not in discipline. In loss, the most dangerous kind of loss, losing myself slowly enough that I didn't see it happening. It was a cold morning. One of those mornings where the world feels heavier than usual, and even getting out of bed feels like a negotiation with your own weakness. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, staring at a version of myself I barely recognized. Eyes tired. Shoulders slouched. Jawline softening. Energy low. Ambition buried under years of doing just enough. And that hurt more than any failure ever did. Because failure is obvious. You know when it hits. But drifting? Drifting is invisible. Silent. Comfortable. Deadly. It doesn't break you. It erodes you. Bit by bit. Day by day. Until one morning, you wake up and realize you have become a passenger in your own life. I put the toothbrush down and whispered to myself, almost without meaning to, when did I stop trying? The answer came immediately, painfully, not in one moment, but in 1,000 small ones. The mornings I hit snooze because sleep felt easier than responsibility. The nights I scrolled instead of thinking. The plans I postponed. The goals I diluted. The dreams I shrank to fit my laziness. The standards I lowered because I didn't want to confront my own potential. Successful men don't do that. They don't drift. They don't negotiate with old habits. They don't wait for motivation. They don't shrink to fit their weaknesses. They do something different. Something I had forgotten. And that morning, standing in a bathroom lit by cold fluorescent lights, I decided I needed to remember. Not for the world. Not for validation. Not for applause. For myself. Because there's a pain every man feels but never talks about, the pain of knowing he is capable of more. And the shame of doing nothing about it. Later that day, I took a walk, not to clear my head, but because sitting still felt unbearable. As I walked past quiet houses and half-asleep streets, a realization hit me: men don't fall behind because of weakness. Men fall behind because they stop respecting the man they want to become. Respect is built through action. Through standards. Through discipline. Through choices made when no one is watching. And in that moment, I asked myself a question that tore straight through the fog of my life: what do successful men do differently that I don't? The answers weren't dramatic. They weren't glamorous. They weren't motivational video material. They were subtle. Foundational. Masculine at the core. Not loud traits. Quiet ones. Deep ones. Habits. Mindsets. Rituals. Ways of thinking and moving through life. Things men do not because someone told them to, but because their identity demands it. And I realized, if I wanted to change my life, I needed to change my identity. Not the way I dressed. Not the way I spoke. Not the way I looked. The way I operated. The way successful men operate. The way men operate when they are in command of themselves. I reached a small park and sat on an empty bench. The air was cold enough to sting my fingertips. But the discomfort felt right, it made me feel awake. And sitting there, I made a decision that would change the direction of my life. I would study them. Not celebrities. Not influencers. Not fictional heroes. Real men. Disciplined men. Purpose-driven men. Men with presence, strength, clarity, command. Men who didn't just achieve success, they embodied it. I wanted to understand the difference. What they did that ordinary men don't. What they chose that I avoided. What they chased that I ignored. What they refused to tolerate. And the irony? It wasn't complicated. It wasn't genetic. It wasn't luck. Successful men build themselves through choices so small, most men never notice them. But these small choices compound into extraordinary lives. And as I sat on that bench, I could feel something inside me waking up, an old instinct, a masculine truth I had buried under comfort and withdrawal. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I wasn't lost. I was underdeveloped. Under-disciplined. Under-focused. Under-committed to my own potential. And that meant one thing: I could change. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. Because men don't transform through inspiration. Men transform through decision. And that morning, I made mine: I will rebuild myself. Brick by brick. Habit by habit. Standard by standard. The way successful men do. But I didn't know yet that this path would expose something deeper, something about men, masculinity, identity, ambition, and the silent war inside every man's mind. Because the first truth I learned was this: successful men don't start with habits. They start with something far more powerful. Something I was about to discover. Something that would become the foundation for everything that came next. Most men think success starts with routines. Wake up early. Go to the gym. Read books. Work harder. Grind longer. But sitting on that cold bench, breath fogging in the morning air, I realized something quietly revolutionary: successful men don't start with habits. They start with standards. Habits come later. Routines come later. Discipline comes later. Standards come first. Not the standards society sets. Not the standards friends expect. Not the standards that look good on social media. The standards a man sets for himself. Standards are internal. Personal. Non-negotiable. A man cannot rise above the standards he tolerates in his own life. And in that moment, I saw the truth I had been avoiding: my life was not shaped by my goals. It was shaped by what I allowed. I allowed lazy mornings. I allowed unfinished tasks. I allowed weak self-talk. I allowed comfort to make my choices for me. I allowed distractions to win. I allowed myself to drift. Successful men don't allow that. Not because they're superhuman. Not because they're fearless. Not because they're motivated every day. But because their standards do not bend. If they say they will do something, they do it. If they set a rule for themselves, they follow it. If they commit to a path, they walk it even when it's uncomfortable, boring, or hard. Discipline is not a habit. It is the byproduct of standards. And I didn't have any. Not real ones. Not masculine ones. Not ones I respected. I leaned back on the bench, watching a few birds dart across the empty sky as a stronger thought pulled itself to the surface: men don't fail because they lack goals. Men fail because they accept a life beneath their potential. A successful man refuses to accept that. He decides, not hopes, not wishes, not dreams, decides what kind of man he will be. And then he raises his standards until his life aligns with that identity. The painful truth? My standards had been low enough to trip over. If I wanted to rebuild myself, I had to raise them. Not gradually. Not gently. With force. With intention. With a level of honesty most men never reach because it is brutally uncomfortable. So right there in that park, I wrote down 3 questions that would become the beginning of everything. What behaviors am I currently tolerating that are unacceptable for the man I want to be? What standards do successful men hold that I don't? What am I no longer willing to allow? The answers were confronting. I wasn't living like a man. I was living like someone hoping life would get better on its own. Successful men don't hope. They take command. That day, back at home, I did something symbolic, small, but meaningful. I cleaned my room. Not half-heartedly. Not casually. Completely. I threw out old clothes. Scrubbed every surface. Reorganized every drawer. Removed anything that made me feel unfocused, weak, or stagnant. It wasn't about a clean room. It was about declaring, I will no longer live in environments that match my lowest standards. The room wasn't just cleaner. It felt different. Sharper. Stronger. Aligned. Successful men curate their environment like a weapon. Because environment shapes behavior. Behavior shapes identity. Identity shapes destiny. But something else happened that day. Something unexpected. As I cleaned, as I lifted, as I threw things out, as I created space, my mind began to match the process. I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in years. A sense of direction. A spark of masculine pride returning, almost shy at first, then louder. And that's when I learned the second truth: successful men move their bodies, not for aesthetics, not to impress, but because movement reactivates masculine presence. As I cleaned, I wasn't exercising, but my body woke up. My back straightened. My shoulders settled. My steps became heavier, grounded, intentional. A man who moves with purpose thinks with purpose. That's when I realized why successful men often talk about physical discipline, not because strength equals status. Because strength equals self-command. And self-command equals freedom. That evening, after the room felt new and I felt new inside it, I sat on the edge of my bed and asked myself the question that would change my life: what does the man I want to become tolerate? The answer was immediate: not excuses. Not chaos. Not half-efforts. Not comfort-driven decisions. Not weak standards. Successful men tolerate only the actions that match their identity. Nothing else. Not because they're strict, because they're aligned. Alignment is masculine clarity. And clarity is a weapon. But raising standards was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not for discipline, not for romance, not for productivity. Because my new standards demanded it. And when I looked in the mirror that morning, the reflection wasn't transformed, but it was different. Not physically. Energetically. There was weight behind my gaze. Direction. Intent. A man with standards moves differently. Speaks differently. Thinks differently. And as I walked into the kitchen, still half asleep but strangely proud, a deeper truth formed inside me: successful men are not defined by what they do. They are defined by what they refuse to do. They refuse to negotiate with their potential. They refuse to let comfort dictate their lives. They refuse to remain who they were yesterday. They refuse to shrink for anyone. And that refusal, that unshakable masculine refusal, is what builds their character. A character I was only beginning to discover. The next step in my transformation did not come from discipline or routines. or hustle. It came from something deeper, something most men never master: the silent structure every successful man builds inside himself. A structure that shapes decisions, emotions, reactions, direction, and destiny. A structure I was about to learn, one that differentiates successful men from average ones more than anything else. There is something every successful man has, something almost invisible, yet unmistakable. You can see it in the way he stands, the way he speaks, the way he moves through a room, the way he handles pressure, the way he reacts to chaos. It isn't confidence. It isn't discipline. It isn't money, power, or status. It is frame. A man's internal framework. His grounding. His inner structure. His personal gravity. His emotional architecture. Frame is the foundation of masculinity. It is the difference between a man who is easily shaken and a man who remains unmovable. Successful men don't just have frame. They build it. They protect it. They guard it like a king guards a kingdom. And up until that point in my life, I had none. After raising my standards, I felt stronger, yes. More focused, yes. More awake, definitely. But I was still fragile in one way: my emotions controlled me more than I controlled them. If someone snapped at me, I absorbed it. If someone doubted me, I shrank. If someone acted cold, I questioned myself. If a plan changed, my mood shifted. If life didn't go my way, I fell apart internally. I didn't have frame. I had reactions. Successful men don't react first. They hold first. They hold themselves, their emotions, their ground, their energy. And that was the next step in my transformation, learning the difference between reacting and holding. I discovered this lesson in the most ordinary moment. A friend texted me something blunt. Not mean. Not insulting. Just blunt. The kind of message that makes your stomach tighten because you instantly interpret it emotionally. Old me would have replied defensively. Explained myself. Justified. Overreacted. Made it bigger than it was. But something inside me stopped. A quiet thought emerged: you don't need to respond from emotion. You can respond from structure. I put the phone down. Breathed. Let the initial reaction pass. And in that brief pause, that tiny moment of stillness, I felt something new: control. Not over him. Over myself. And that moment taught me one of the greatest truths about men: a man's power is not in what he controls. It is in what he doesn't let control him. That is frame. Frame is choosing response over reaction. Direction over impulse. Composure over chaos. Frame is the masculine ability to remain centered no matter the situation. And successful men master this early. From that day on, I practiced holding my frame in small ways. When someone spoke to me abruptly, I didn't take it personally. When something unexpected happened, I didn't collapse into frustration. When I felt overwhelmed, I didn't drown in it. I held myself. And something incredible started to happen: people treated me differently. Not because I changed physically, but because my energy changed. When you hold your frame, others feel it. They can't always explain it, but they recognize it instantly. A man with frame is grounded. Predictable in the best way. Unshakable. Stable. Not stiff-centered. Men respect him. Women trust him. The world responds to him. And for the first time, I understood why successful men seem so calm even under stress. They don't let the world dictate who they are. Their identity comes from within. I learned the second component of frame soon after: emotional independence. Most men think independence means not needing anything from anyone. Wrong. Independence is not isolation. It is orientation. It is knowing that your emotional stability comes from your inner world, not from external validation. Not from attention. Not from approval. Not from being liked. Not from reassurance. Successful men don't depend on external things to feel okay. Because if the world can give you identity, the world can take it away. Emotional independence is the armor of masculine strength. And I had to build it from scratch. I practiced by doing something simple. Whenever I felt myself seeking approval, I paused and asked, "What do I think about this? What do I want? What is my standard here?" And slowly, piece by piece, I became my own reference point. Which led to a deeper truth: frame is built by leading yourself before you try to lead anything else. A man without self-leadership has no frame. A man with self-leadership becomes someone people naturally follow. Because true leadership begins within. But the most powerful part of frame? It wasn't emotional discipline. It wasn't self-leadership. It wasn't masculine grounding. It was something deeper, something I didn't understand until a moment that shattered my old identity completely. A moment when life threw me a challenge that I wasn't prepared for, and my old self would have broken instantly. But the new me, the man building standards, discipline, and frame, responded differently. It happened one late afternoon. Work had gone wrong. Plans had fallen apart. Unexpected problems hit from every direction. Everything felt heavy and overwhelming, the kind of day that used to send me spiraling. I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, breath shaky. The voice inside me whispered, "Here it comes. The old you. The collapse. The frustration. The discouragement." But then, something inside me rose. Not aggression. Not denial. Not forced positivity. Strength. A quiet, grounded, masculine strength. I whispered out loud, "Hold your frame." And in that moment, I realized the final truth: the man who can hold himself in chaos is the man who succeeds in life. Not because life gets easier, but because he becomes stronger. Stronger than his emotions. Stronger than his impulses. Stronger than his doubt. Stronger than the noise. That day, sitting in my car, I learned the deepest masculine lesson: successful men do not avoid pressure. They become men who can withstand it. That is frame. And once you have frame, you are no longer the same man. But frame is only one piece of what successful men do differently. The next shift, the next evolution, goes even deeper. It is the silent engine behind success. The invisible force that drives men forward. The mindset that ordinary men never understand. A mindset I was about to discover, one that would transform me more than anything else so far. Most men think success is built through force. Push harder. Grind more. Sleep less. Do more. Sacrifice everything. But as my standards rose and my frame strengthened, I realized something that hit me like a silent punch to the gut: successful men aren't the ones who push hardest. They're the ones who think differently. Their mindset isn't built on intensity. It's built on identity. I learned this the day I discovered a truth most men never hear: successful men don't chase success. They expect it because they operate from a mindset where success is the natural outcome of who they are. The average man thinks, "I hope it works." The successful man thinks, "It works because I work." That shift, from hope to expectation, changes everything. And it began for me in a moment I didn't see coming. It was a Saturday morning. Cool air. Sunlight stretching across my floor. The kind of morning that used to disappear into hours of procrastination and distraction. But not anymore. I made coffee, sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and instead of writing tasks or goals, something inside me told me to write a question: what belief is holding me back the most? I stared at the page. And something inside me cracked open. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a door I didn't know was locked, suddenly clicked. And I wrote a sentence that I had never admitted, not to myself, not to anyone: I don't believe I'm meant to win. Seeing it written out felt like a confession. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just painfully honest. A belief rooted deep in my identity, hidden beneath years of pretending to be fine. A belief most men carry silently, the belief that winning is for other men. Stronger men. Smarter men. Luckier men. Not us. And that belief shapes everything: your decisions, your effort, your confidence, your self-respect, your future. Because a man never outruns the beliefs he holds about who he is. I leaned back in my chair, heart beating faster than it should, because I understood something important. This wasn't about skill. This wasn't about discipline. This wasn't about habits. This was identity. And identity is the real battlefield. Most men think their problem is lack of motivation. Their real problem is lack of identity alignment. If you don't see yourself as the kind of man who wins, you will sabotage every chance you get. If you don't see yourself as disciplined, you'll break every habit. If you don't see yourself as valuable, you'll seek validation instead of mastery. If you don't see yourself as powerful, you'll live life on your back foot. Identity dictates destiny. And that morning, I realized the truth: successful men don't act successful because they've succeeded. They succeed because they act like successful men before the results come. They hold themselves to a higher internal reality long before external success catches up. That's the mindset difference. And that mindset was the next evolution in my transformation. So I did something uncomfortable, something that felt unnatural, almost like lying to myself. I wrote a new belief: I am becoming the kind of man who wins. Not I am successful. Not I'm a champion. Not fake confidence. But identity in motion. Becoming. Because becoming is honest. Becoming is forward moving. Becoming gives you space to grow without pretending to be something you're not. And every day that week, I repeated that sentence. Not loudly. Not arrogantly. Calmly. Internally. Like instruction to my subconscious. I am becoming the kind of man who wins. Something surprising happened. I started treating my choices differently. I no longer asked, what do I feel like doing today? I asked, what would a man who wins choose right now? And the answer changed everything. A man who wins doesn't wait for motivation. He creates momentum. A man who wins doesn't negotiate with laziness. He honors his standards. A man who wins doesn't collapse under pressure. He holds his frame. A man who wins doesn't fear failure. He fears not trying. A man who wins doesn't need validation. He validates himself. And slowly, quietly, consistently, I started becoming him. Not perfectly. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But undeniably. One day during this shift, something happened that showed me I was changing in a way I couldn't deny. I was at the gym. The place was noisy, weights clanking, conversations echoing, music thumping. Normally, a place like that intimidated me. I would keep to myself, avoid eye contact, stick to safe exercises. But not that day. That day, I walked indifferently. Not with swagger. Not with arrogance. With presence. The kind of presence that comes from a man who isn't trying to prove himself, because he finally believes in himself. And as I lifted, sweat dripping, muscles burning, something inside me clicked: effort doesn't define successful men. Identity does. They don't train to become a man. They train because they already are one. And that shift, that internal shift, made every rep feel different. Every decision feel different. Every moment feel different. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was aligning with it. Aligning with the kind of man who expects more from himself. Not out of insecurity, but out of self-respect. Standing in front of the gym mirror, breath heavy, arms shaking, heart pounding, I whispered something I didn't expect to hear come out of my own mouth: this is who I was meant to be. Not perfect. Not finished. Not complete. Becoming. Evolving. Strengthening. Rising. And the real truth hit me: successful men aren't better men. They are men who refuse to stay who they used to be. That refusal is their superpower. And it was becoming mine. But the mindset shift was only the beginning. The next transformation came from something deeper, something most men struggle with in silence. A force that either builds a man's life or destroys it quietly from the inside. The next thing successful men do differently would reveal a truth about masculine purpose that most men never hear in time. There comes a point in a man's life when he realizes something uncomfortable: discipline isn't enough. Strength isn't enough. Standards aren't enough. Even identity isn't enough. Because a man without purpose is a man running on fumes. And for most of my life, I misunderstood purpose completely. I thought purpose had to be big, grand, world-changing, impressive, public, something worthy of applause. Successful men know the truth: purpose isn't something you find. Purpose is something you build. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. Day by day. Purpose is not discovered. Purpose is constructed. And the moment this clicked for me, everything in my life shifted. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special. Nothing dramatic. I was sitting alone in a cafe, watching people rush in and out: business meetings, students studying, couples arguing quietly, a man typing furiously on his laptop, a teenager scrolling endlessly. Everyone seemed to be moving towards something. Except me. I was moving through life, but not toward anything. I had standards now. I had frame. I was becoming stronger, sharper, clearer. But something inside me still felt directionless. Like a car with a powerful engine but no destination. And then, in the middle of my coffee going cold, a thought dropped into my mind so heavy it felt like a hammer hitting the table: you're improving your life. But you're not building your mission. That realization landed hard. Because discipline without direction becomes burnout. Strength without purpose becomes aggression. Growth without meaning becomes emptiness. And I understood something that separated successful men from everyone else: successful men don't live for comfort. They don't live for pleasure. They don't live to feel good. They live for direction. Men are not built to wander. Men are built to aim. And I had no aim. I left the cafe and walked for an hour, thinking. Not the anxious kind of thinking. Not the overthinking that leads nowhere. A deeper kind of thinking. A masculine kind of thinking. What am I actually building? Not what do I want. Not what sounds impressive. Not what I've been told to achieve. What am I building? And for the first time, I answered honestly: nothing. Not really. I was improving myself, yes. But improvement without direction is a treadmill. You get stronger, but you don't get anywhere. Successful men move with intention. Ordinary men move with routine. And as I walked through the cool air, something inside me shifted, a decision forming in the quiet space between my breath and my thoughts: I will build something that outlives me. That sentence felt heavy. powerful, anchoring. Not because I had a plan, but because I finally had a starting point. Purpose doesn't appear fully formed. Purpose starts as a decision, a declaration. And that day, I made mine. But the next realization came just as quickly: purpose is not passion. Most men wait for passion to strike. Successful men don't wait. They choose a direction and move. Passion grows through progress. Progress grows through consistency. Consistency grows through purpose. It's a cycle, a masculine cycle, and I was finally stepping into it. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote down 3 questions. What impact do I want my life to make? What kind of man must I become to create that impact? What is the smallest step I can take toward that direction today? The answers weren't polished. They weren't impressive. They weren't grand. But they were true. And truth is the seed of purpose. I wrote, I want to live a life that commands respect from myself first. And that was enough. More than enough. From that day, everything changed in small but meaningful ways. When I woke up in the morning, I no longer asked, what should I do today? I asked, what moves me toward the man I'm becoming? When I felt tired, I asked, does the man I want to be quit here? When I faced a setback, I asked, what does this teach me about my mission? This is what successful men do differently: they interpret everything through purpose. Not emotion. Not insecurity. Not impulse. Purpose. Purpose is the lens. Purpose is the filter. Purpose is the compass. And once this mindset clicked, something remarkable happened. Life became simpler. Not easier, simpler. Decisions became clearer. Distractions became irrelevant. Weakness became unacceptable. Growth became automatic. Excuses became embarrassing. Momentum became inevitable. Because when a man lives with purpose, he stops chasing pleasure and starts chasing meaning. And meaning is the fuel that keeps a man alive. One moment fully confirmed the shift inside me. I was out with friends one evening. Everyone was drinking, laughing, wasting time. The kind of night I once lived for, nights that made me feel included, entertained, distracted. But for the first time, I felt out of place. Not superior. Not judgmental. Just aware. Aware that the man I was becoming didn't belong in rooms where his purpose was forgotten. I left early. Walked home alone. Not lonely, centered. Because successful men do not fear solitude. They require it. Purpose grows in silence. Not noise. And that night, walking through empty streets under dim streetlights, I whispered something to myself, something I felt bone deep: I am not meant for an average life. Not because I'm special. Not because I'm gifted. But because I've decided to outgrow the version of myself who settled for one. Purpose isn't a feeling. Purpose is a choice. A choice successful men make daily, and average men make never. But purpose wasn't the final piece. There was still one more thing. Something that separates truly successful men from men who almost succeed. Something that pushes a man from improvement into evolution. A truth about discipline that most men misunderstand. A truth I was about to discover, a truth that would push me into the climax of my transformation. Purpose gave me direction. Frame gave me stability. Standards gave me structure. Identity gave me momentum. But there was still one truth every successful man eventually learns, a truth I had avoided for most of my life: motivation is unreliable. Inspiration is temporary. Confidence comes and goes. And no matter how strong your purpose is, there will be days when you don't feel like doing anything. Successful men don't succeed because they feel like it. They succeed because they act even when they don't. This was the next evolution, the discipline shift. The moment discipline stops being a task and becomes a character trait. And it began with something so small and so unexpected that I almost missed its importance entirely. It was a cold morning. One of those mornings when the alarm goes off and your first instinct is to negotiate with yourself. 5 more minutes. I'll start tomorrow. Just today doesn't matter. Old me would have listened. But this new version of me, the one building standards, frame, identity, and purpose, hesitated. As the alarm rang, I stared at the ceiling and felt the familiar wave of resistance wash through me. You're tired. You deserve rest. One day won't hurt. And something inside me whispered, this is the moment that decides everything. Not the big decisions. Not the grand goals. Not the dramatic moments. This. The tiny, unglamorous, invisible choice that defines the type of man I am. So I did something I never used to do. I didn't think. I acted. I sat up. Feet on the floor. Standards engaged. Frame steady. Identity aligned. Purpose remembered. And when I stood up, something powerful happened, not pride. Not excitement. Clarity. I finally understood what successful men do differently. They don't wait to feel ready. They act and let the feelings catch up. Motivation follows discipline, never the other way around. Later that morning, during a simple task at work, another lesson hit me hard. Discipline is not about intensity. Discipline is about predictability. Successful men trust themselves because they know exactly how they will act when resistance shows up. There is no debate. There is no negotiation. There is no bargaining. There is only the standard. And the moment I adopted this truth, discipline stopped feeling like a burden and started feeling like freedom. Because discipline removes decision-making. And decision-making is where most men fail. Most men lose the battle because they allow themselves too many choices. Successful men don't. They choose once, then they live by that choice. But the real turning point came a few days later. I was in the gym, mid-workout, muscles burning, energy fading. The kind of moment where the average man quits and the successful man is born. Every part of me wanted to stop. Just skip the last set. You've done enough. It doesn't matter. And for a split second, I almost put the weights down. But then I heard a question inside my mind, a question that didn't come from weakness but from strength. If you quit here, what else will you quit? That question hit me like a punch. Because discipline isn't about this set. It isn't about this workout. It isn't about this moment. Discipline is about identity maintenance. Every time you quit, you teach your identity to quit. Every time you push, you teach your identity to lead. So I pushed. Slow, shaky, imperfect, but I finished the set. And when I racked the weights, chest heaving, sweat dripping, arms trembling, I felt something deeper than discipline. I felt self-respect. And that's when the truth became clear. Discipline isn't about forcing yourself. Discipline is the art of keeping promises to yourself. Successful men don't have more willpower. They simply refuse to break their word, especially to themselves. But discipline has layers. And I was about to learn the next one in the most unexpected moment. It happened on a day when nothing went right. Work problems. Unexpected setbacks. Plans falling apart. Delays. Distractions. One thing after another. By the evening, I was exhausted. My purpose felt distant. My identity felt shaky. My frame felt tested. My standards felt heavy. Old me would have collapsed into comfort. Order food. Watch something. Shut off my mind. Escape. But something stopped me. A sentence appeared in my mind, calm and steady. Do the bare minimum your highest self requires. I didn't need to be extraordinary. I didn't need to do everything. I didn't need to push hard. I just needed to keep my identity alive. So I did one tiny action, the smallest one I could commit to with integrity. A short walk. 10 push-ups. 5 minutes of journaling. Something. Anything. And that action taught me the rarest truth: discipline is not measured by your best days. Discipline is measured by your worst days. Successful men win because they don't let the storm decide their behavior. They anchor themselves with routine, even when the world is trying to pull them apart. One night, during this phase of my transformation, I stumbled on the final discipline truth, the one that separates average men from unstoppable men. It wasn't a motivational quote. It wasn't a book. It wasn't advice. It was a moment. I came home late. Bone tired. Mind foggy. Body drained. And as I walked past the mirror in the hallway, I saw myself. Not physically. Energetically. A man covered in sweat and fatigue, but still standing. Still showing up. Still pushing. Still keeping his word. And in that reflection, I saw a version of myself I had never seen before, a man who trusts himself. A man who respects himself. A man who no longer breaks promises to himself. And in that moment, I realized the discipline shift was complete. Discipline was no longer something I was doing. It was someone I was becoming. But there was one final transformation. One final shift. A truth that defines the difference between men who become successful and men who remain average: the ability to outgrow the environment, people, and identity that once defined you. The next chapter would be the hardest one, the emotional climax, because it would reveal the final thing successful men do differently: they learn to walk alone before they walk ahead. And that truth would change everything. Success changes a man long before the world notices. Long before money arrives. Long before results show. Long before anyone claps. Long before anyone believes in him. The change begins silently. Inside. In the way he thinks. In the way he moves. In the way he reacts. In the way he chooses. In the way he carries himself. And when a man changes internally, his world begins to shift externally. Slowly at first. Then suddenly. That's when the final challenge appears, the one nobody warns you about, the one most men are completely unprepared for. To become a successful man, you will outgrow the life you built as an average one. And that is painful. Beautiful, but painful. Because becoming a new man requires releasing the old one. This realization hit me on a night that started so normally, I never expected it to become a turning point. A friend had invited me out. Just a casual hangout. Something I used to say yes to without thinking. But as I stood in front of my mirror, getting ready, I felt something unusual: resistance. Not social anxiety. Not laziness. Not loneliness. A quiet inner pull that said, "You don't belong in those rooms anymore." At first, I brushed it off. Don't be dramatic. It's just a night out. Relax. But as I walked into the restaurant, something became painfully clear: the conversations were the same. The jokes were the same. The complaints were the same. The mindset was the same. The energy was the same. Everything was the same except me. I wasn't superior. I wasn't arrogant. I wasn't judging them. I just didn't fit anymore. I felt like a man who had broken out of a cage, returning to visit the other birds who never knew a world existed beyond the bars. And the longer I sat there, the more suffocating it felt. I excused myself early and walked outside. Cold air hit my face. My breath fogged in the night. And the truth hit me so suddenly that I stopped walking. You are not losing people. You are shedding versions of yourself that cannot come with you. That realization cut deep. Because success isn't only about building. It's about releasing. Successful men let go. Average men cling. But there was another truth, a harder one. As you rise, you don't just outgrow people. You outgrow environments. The places you used to relax no longer recharge you. The habits you used to rely on no longer satisfy you. The routines you once found normal now feel suffocating. Your old life becomes too small for the man you're becoming. And standing under that cold streetlight, I realized something else: you will also outgrow versions of yourself. The passive version. The insecure version. The distracted version. The fearful version. The undisciplined version. The unfocused version. And letting go of those versions feels like losing a part of you. But successful men know the truth: every evolution feels like a death because it is one. The death of who you were to make space for who you're meant to be. A week later, I faced the hardest version of this lesson. It wasn't about friends, or habits, or environments. It was about identity. I was journaling, something that had become a daily ritual, and out of nowhere, the pen slowed, my breath tightened, and a thought surfaced from a part of me I hadn't accessed in years: you don't fully believe you deserve the life you're building. And the moment I read those words on the page, I felt everything in me go quiet. Because it was true. Deep down, the old version of me still saw myself as average. Still saw myself as limited. Still saw myself as undeserving of greatness. And that old version was fighting to survive. Not through sabotage. Not through fear. Through attachment. Because the old self is familiar. Comfortable. Predictable. It knows its place. But the new self? The successful self? He demands more. More discipline. More courage. More risk. More standards. More resilience. More solitude. More responsibility. Becoming him means leaving behind the man I used to be, a man who had good intentions but lacked the structure and strength to truly rise. That night, I closed my eyes and whispered a sentence that felt like closing a chapter: "Thank you for getting me here. But I can't take you further." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was acceptance. And in that acceptance, I felt something I hadn't felt before: peace. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the path was easy. Because I finally understood the last thing successful men do differently: they choose evolution over attachment every time. From that night on, my life began to shift in ways I didn't expect. Not through massive changes. Not through big moments. Through small transitions. I spent more time alone, not lonely, but focused. I took more responsibility for my path, not out of pressure, but pride. I became more selective with my energy, not out of ego, but alignment. I stopped explaining myself, not out of silence, but certainty. I measured myself only against my own potential, not out of competition, but clarity. And with every step, the gap between the man I used to be and the man I was becoming grew wider. Not painfully. Naturally. Because rising is natural, when you stop holding on to what pulls you down. And then, one morning, weeks into this final transformation, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Same eyes. Same face. Same body. But not the same man. The man staring back at me stood taller. Looked sharper. Carried an energy of direction, focus, standards, discipline, and simmering purpose. And I realized something quietly powerful: the life I once begged for was now the life I expected of myself. Not because life changed, but because I did. Successful men build themselves from the inside out. Piece by piece. Standard by standard. Belief by belief. Choice by choice. Until one day, they wake up as the kind of man they always knew they could be. My journey wasn't finished. Growth never ends. But I had become something I never expected, a man I respected. A man I trusted. A man I no longer doubted. A man I could build a future with. And that is the final evolution. Successful men don't do one thing differently. They do everything differently because they become different.